Hi everybody. Can I please invite everybody to make sure that you're on mute, please, so that we minimize the background noise. We'll deal with a few housekeeping points before we get stuck into the actual session itself. We've got a great turnout tonight. Thank you all very much indeed for finding and making the time to be with us. I personally think we're covering a topic of extreme importance. I really do. I don't want to kind of over dramatize this, but it looks as though there's something going wrong in the system. We want to try to understand that. We want to try to fix it, and we want to work in an evidence-based way. So as I say, folks, please make 100% sure you're on mute. I'll try to do that at my end if I see folk who aren't on mute. If you're not muted, we get lots of background noise and it just gets in the way of stuff.
Are we muted?
No, you're not, Chrissy. I'll mute you now. There we go. So make sure you're muted, please. Thank you. Also, make sure that you've got your name showing. Okay. If, for example, you've got iPad showing, or you've got just your first name showing, or you've got something like iPhone showing, then please adjust it so that you can actually make sure we know who you actually are. That's very important from a governance point of view, as well as making the event a little bit more sociable. We're going to try and make this as close to a real live event as we can, bearing, of course, in mind the obvious limitations. We can't do much about those, but we can try to make this event as engaging and hopefully as interesting, and perhaps even as inspiring as it can possibly be. Now, in a moment, I'm going to properly introduce myself, and then we'll be passing over to our keynote speaker, Julian Watts, who's done an absolutely sterling job in getting his campaign to where we are now. And I have to tell you that this event has absolutely been inspired by Julian and his work, and I'm very pleased that we are able to host you all and bring the session together. Now, some of you are brand new to the Transparency Task Force, so it does make sense to explain a bit about us and what we're all about. So I'll do that in a moment. So just two things, remember. Number one, make sure you're on mute, please. And number two, make sure you've got your full name, first name and surname showing, because it's important you do that. Okay, I'll also make a couple of other housekeeping points before diving into the introductions properly. Please bear in mind that the session is being recorded. Somebody needs to mute, please. Please bear in mind that the session is being recorded. We will be converting the recording into a free-to-access video, which will be posted online within probably a day or two, something like that. And please do all you can to circulate that video, because it helps to get the word out there. We aren't an organisation with a great deal of budget. We rely upon the goodwill within the community that we've built to do what we do. So please play your part, ladies and gentlemen, in making sure that you help us get the word out there in the way that I've described. Now, for those of you who've joined late, please do make sure you're on mute so we can minimise the background noise. Okay. Also, we have got the chat facility open, which means you're welcome to put anything you like, so long as it's polite. Okay, that's the rule. Anything you like, as long as it's polite, into the chat, including if you wanted to contact details, questions, comments, etc. But be civilized. I think even though we are punching well above our weight as a campaign organisation, I think it's fair to say that we've managed to keep a pretty good, clean reputation in terms of being a civilized bunch of folk, a polite bunch of folk. So keep it polite, but say what you like in the chat. And we'll also be circulating the chat to everybody that's booked on when we circulate the notes from the meeting. Okay, I'm now going to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me or the Transparency Task Force. So I'm Andy Agathangelou. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. I created the Transparency Task Force back in 2015 as a consequence of having spent pretty much all of my life working in and being connected to the financial services sector. I came to the conclusion many years ago that the financial industry is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to political stability to financial security for people. But I also came to the conclusion that give it half a chance and it will misbehave. It really will misbehave. So I decided many years ago that I would try to do something about that. And I've now dedicated my working time, which is quite a bit, trying to make a difference. And what we've managed to do over the last 6.5 years or so is to actually build a community of over 4,000 people around the world who have some kind of an interest in transparency. We are people who believe there needs to be greater transparency in the financial services sector. We think that greater transparency will lead to greater truthfulness, and then that will in turn lead to greater trustworthiness. So what we're all about is essentially fixing the financial services sector. I'm going to share my screen just to talk you through one or two items. The first thing you're looking at, folks, is our mission statement. So this mission statement really does sum up quite concisely what the Transparency Task Force is all about. As you can see there, our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial services sector so that it serves society better. That's what we are all about. We do what we do in many and varied ways. One of the most important things we do is we run events like this. And I'm now going to show you our events program for November. Here we are on Wednesday, the 3rd of November, at this event all about the bank signature forgery campaign. On Monday of next week, we have what we call one of our film club sessions, where people will have previously, prior to the event, watched the film called The Wolf of Wall Street, and then we'll be discussing it on Monday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. It is a particularly good film. You've probably watched it at least once or twice. So we'll be talking about it and thinking about what lessons has it got for today's financial system. And it does have lessons for today's financial system. On Thursday of next week, we've got an event all about costs and charges in the pensions and investments sector. We've got several violation tracker events coming up. I'll talk about violation tracker in a moment. On the 16th of November, we've got this event, which is all about accelerating our journey towards a green economy before it's too late. The day after, we've got one all about the female perspective on financial services. And the day after that, we've got one for our USA members. We've got roughly 1,000 people outside the UK who are members of the Transparency Task Force. On Thursday, we've got an event all about the question, how should the finance sector in the USA be reformed? On the 22nd, another film club event where we're going to be talking about an absolutely superb documentary. And I think this documentary is actually quite relevant to what we are talking about today. The documentary is a dirty money documentary called Wagon Wheel. It's basically all about the way that Wells Fargo Bank, over a period of several years, was doing all kinds of dodgy things. I won't elaborate on it right now, but seriously dodgy things, so on and so forth. So later in the session, I'll put into the chat a link to that particular web page, so you can go to it if you want and learn a bit more about the events that we are running. I mentioned Violation Tracker. So Violation Tracker is a US database. It is a database that's remarkably relevant to the work that we do. And I'm going to show you why I say that. So you click on Violation Tracker here, and you can do many things with this database. What I'm going to show you first of all is this particular web page. It is a database, a list of how different industries rank in terms of how bad they are. When I say how bad they are, I mean how bad they are in terms of how much they break the rules, measured by how much they get fined. So, for example, here in 50th place, we have Integrated Diagnostics, whatever that is, which has been fined over $3.5 million. This is all, by the way, since the year 2000. The hotel sector is the 49th worst, $59 million, so on and so forth. Now, I would argue, ladies and gentlemen, that the financial services industry is an industry that's built on being trustworthy. The word credit, in fact, comes from the Latin word credere, which means belief or to have belief in. So there's quite a strong argument to say that the financial services sector should go about its work in such a way that it maintains its integrity and its credibility and its trustworthiness. So you would be really quite shocked if the financial services sector was anywhere near the top of the naughty list. But look what we've got. The actual data shows us that the financial services sector is not just amongst the worst, it is the worst. And not only is it the worst, it is the worst by a long, long way. Look at that figure there, please, folks. $333 billion worth of fines against the financial services sector. And that is an enormous number. It is absolutely, absolutely huge. And in fact, it is so big that it is actually roughly half of the total. So $1 in two that relates to fines in the financial services sector is directly attributable to the financial services industry. And when you click on the link and go into a bit more detail, what you see is a breakdown of the worst offending organizations. And who are they? Well, essentially, and this may not surprise you at all, essentially it is the banks. The banks. And when you scroll down further, you start to see a very, very, very worrying pattern. And the very worrying pattern, folks, is that the banks get caught doing bad things. They get fined for doing bad things. And what do they then do? They carry on doing the bad things that they got fined for. And this is a pattern we see time and time again, which brings to the surface two very important questions. One question is the regulatory framework failing? I personally think the answer to that question is yes. And my evidence is this: if the regulatory framework wasn't failing, then when banks do bad things, they would actually be fined and would change their behavior. But what we're seeing here is a pattern of recidivism, whereby banks do bad things, get fined and carry on doing bad things. So there's a huge question about whether the regulatory framework is actually fit for purpose. The good news is, folks, that whilst this is a US orientated database, I'm very, very pleased to say that we are going to be launching Violation Tracker UK. When I say we have not built the database, we're just involved with it coming to the UK. We've put a fair amount of time and effort into that. So Violation Tracker UK launch events are taking place between November the 16th and Thursday, December the 2nd. You'll see that they have different, the events have different focus. One has a focus on for trade union people, one has a focus for corporate accountability, academic, civil society, etc. So again, I'll make sure you all get a link to this webpage. You are welcome to attend these events on a completely no cost basis, and please help us spread the word. I say this because the more people there are who are aware of Violation Tracker, the more we can do with it, the more publicity we can create off the back of it, so on and so forth. I'm also going to take this opportunity to explain that the Transparency Task Force is the secretariat to two all-party parliamentary groups. The one you're looking at right now, as you can see, is about pension scams. The other one that we run is the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services. I'm very pleased to say that the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services is very successfully working its way through a call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. An exercise like this has never been done before. There's never been an exercise where a non-financial conduct authority entity is actually looking into how they've been functioning. And we've had about 120 people step forward so far, download the questionnaire and respond to it, which has been superb. We're now also getting current and or former employees of the Financial Conduct Authority also stepping forward. And whilst I can't say too much right now, I can tell you this: the testimony is worrying. The testimony they are providing is worrying. It makes me concerned about whether we have a Financial Conduct Authority that is fit for purpose. So if you haven't yet completed the questionnaire and you have personally had experience of dealing with the Financial Conduct Authority in any capacity, then you are welcome to be one of the people who are stepping forward giving evidence. And I'm very, very pleased to say that some of the individuals who've been giving evidence about the FCA have also taken time to share their evidence by way of a video recording of an interview. So here's Richard Emery, who's one of the Transparency Task Force ambassadors. Here's Mark Bishop, who likewise is a TTF ambassador and frankly, an incredibly supportive leader of our community. Here we've got an interview with Peter O'Donnell. Here we've got an interview with Abhishek Sachdev. And we've got several others working their way through the pipeline. And please do take the time to learn more about that. Okay, now I do hope that gives everybody a bit of a feel for what the Transparency Task Force is all about. If somebody said to me, how would you summarize what the TTF is all about if you had to in just a couple of sentences? I'd probably say we're a bunch of 4,000 people around the world who are fed up with the way the financial industry works, want to change it for the better, and are able and willing to operate in a very collaborative and collegiate way to make a difference. And making a difference is what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. We are not a talking shop. Believe you me, if I thought the TTF was only capable of talking about the problems, I'd go back to earning a decent living. We are all about making a difference. And part of that making a difference process is about shining a big, bright light on things that are happening that shouldn't be happening. And that's one of the main reasons we run events like the event we're running tonight. I believe there are things happening and there are things that have been happening that are wrong, that need sorting out. And for one reason or another, it would appear as though the regulators, the authorities, the establishment haven't been doing a good job of sorting it out. So our first speaker, as I said earlier, is Julian Watts. Julian will be speaking for a moment. Julian is our keynote speaker. He's got a lot of information to share with you, a hell of a lot of insight and experience. He's prepared some slides. Can we please show our appreciation, not just for the presentation that Julian's about to deliver, but also for the years of purely voluntary working and campaigning behind the scenes to gather the evidence, to shine a big bright light of truth on this issue around the allegation that there has been systematic shenanigans going on within parts of the banking sector. So please, let's show our appreciation to Julian. And Julian, over to you. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Perfect. And Julian is a whiz at sharing his slides. I need to just do one thing. Bear with me a second. Okay, Julian, if you speak now, you should come onto this screen in a big picture. That's great. Thank you. Over to you.
Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Andy. And before I start going through the presentation, I just wanted to say I'm conscious that there's probably at least 3 groups of people who are watching this either live or on the recording. The first is all the bank customer victims. And I just wanted to say thank you to all the victims who have already sent in their evidence to the campaign. Obviously, without the victims sending evidence into the campaign, there would be no campaign. So it's really appreciated that you've done that. And I hope that as we go through the presentation, you'll be able to see where your evidence fits in with the overall findings and conclusions that the campaign has come up with. The second group are campaigners, MPs, lords, etc., who are interested in this topic. And again, I hope as people go through the presentation, they'll come to the conclusion that it's really important that they decide to take action and actually get this stuff addressed. And the third group of people are unfortunately the banks and their law firms who are opposing the campaign, and other people opposing the campaign. There's been a huge opposition to the campaign that we've had to deal with. And I'd just like to, for those people, I'd just like to draw their attention to the disclaimer on the cover page of the presentation, and just to highlight that everything that's being expressed today, we recognise are opinions, and they're about allegations, and unfortunately allegations which are yet to be investigated. So in terms of the key issue, the key issue is that is alleged systemic, serious organised crime by some banks in order to win court cases by customers. So if you look on the left-hand side there, this includes the forgery of signatures, which includes bank staff's own signatures, customer signatures and customer witness signatures. The fabrication of evidence, which includes all sorts of evidence, but including contracts and guarantees and bank records. Concealing of evidence, which is both the actual documents themselves and also the metadata about the document. So metadata is information about the document, such as the date it was created and who created it. And that is key evidence for discovering about where other documents have been fabricated. If you know the date it was created and who created it, that's evidence of when there's been forgery or fabrication of other documents. And the last one there is false statements and representations. So this includes false representations in court documents like witness statements, and also falsely signing the statements of truth on court documents when the bank knows that the contents are false. So all of these apply to various documents, and they range from court documents like claim forms and particulars of claim witness statements which have a signed statement of truth on the bottom, and then also contracts, mortgage contracts, loan agreements, guarantees, and also the bank's own records, customer records and customer accounts. So this is serious crime. It's serious organised crime, and including perverting the course of justice, fraud, perjury, and proceeds of crime offences. So bank signature forgery and related crimes have actually already been investigated in the USA. That all started off, the initial evidence that started all that off was actually 3 customers realising that signatures on bank court documents were forged. And that was the beginning of it. And then the media picked up the story, and eventually it led to an investigation by all 50 US state attorney generals that concluded in 2012. And some of the results of that were penalty payments by US banks of 25 billion, a review of 4 million court cases by banks against customers. A company CEO was actually jailed for overseeing a standard business process involving forging signatures on over 1 million bank court documents. Separate from that, but related, local government officials also were doing their own investigations, and they, for example, some of them found that 74% of a sample of over 6,000 bank court documents had suspect signatures. I mean, that figure alone is stunning, actually. The US Department of Justice stated the penalty payments were the largest consumer financial protection settlement in US history, and bank signature forgery, or foreclosure fraud, as it was known in the USA, was the largest consumer fraud in American history. Okay, so what came out from the States was, this was the largest in history level event. This wasn't a few rogue employees. This was systemic and on an industrial scale. So why did this happen? Well, this is about the industrialization of debt recovery. So in the middle there, when companies have to do the same thing repeatedly, they develop a standard business process, and that is completely legitimate, and the objectives of that are completely legitimate. They're dealing with a high volume, they're trying to do it at low cost, a repeated task, and they're trying to increase efficiency. Okay, so, but the issue is when there's a fault in the standard production line, it has industrial scale consequences. So for example, on a car factory production line, if there's a fault in the production line, then car manufacturers sometimes have to record millions of cars to fix the same fault in each of them. And if if organisations are running a court document production line, if signatures have been forged on a court document as part of a production line, then every court document created through that standard business process could also have a forged signature. Okay, so this is about industrialisation of debt recovery and the consequences of that. The objectives originally might have been legitimate, but we're talking about the consequences when things go wrong. And banks have a legitimate right to recover consumer and business debt. The campaign's not arguing about that at all. That is completely legitimate to recover the debt. The issue is that banks are subject to criminal laws about how they go about doing that, including fraud and forgery and perverting the course of justice. So in the UK, the campaign's got extensive evidence from customers, which has been corroborated by bank whistleblowers and others. So in the middle there, we've now got evidence going back, well, from 1975 onwards, 45 years, that this has been going on. Okay, and this is now, that's from customers, and it's now been supported by other evidence from other sources, including top left-hand corner, bank current and former senior manager whistleblowers, stating that there's a culture of signature forgery and signature forgery was rampant. And the significance of that is, what that means is it's got embedded in the organisation's culture and is part of standard business process that the organisation is operating. So this can't be dismissed as, oh, we've got a rogue employee who's done something wrong. This is now part of how the organisation operates. Okay, and so it's systemic, it's at a systemic level. The next one down there, bank industry advisors. So a quote from an industry advisor, my conclusion based on 30 years experience is that banks forging signatures, fabricating evidence and concealing evidence in disputes with their own customers is endemic. Okay, so further confirmation that this is happening at a systemic level. This isn't one or two isolated incidents, it's actually been absorbed into the organisation's culture and business process. And then other corroborating evidence from bank external documents like full statements in banks' annual reports and accounts, internal documents which have been passed to the campaign. So these include showing that the banks are including systemic standard full statements in court documents, and they're pumping these into all these documents that are going out. Bank exec omissions and full statements, including to select committees and MPs, and also bank exec omissions, so including systemic conduct from the 1980s. With a quote from the bank exec, I agree that could be that could be misleading. The letter is fundamentally misleading, yes. So all of these things are corroborating the evidence that's come in through the customers and just confirming that this isn't isolated incidents, it's actually systemic within the organisation. And the prudent conclusion from this is basically over 1 million UK customer, maybe over 1 million UK customer victims over the last 30 years of banks' systemic signature forgery, fabricating and concealing evidence in court cases against customers. So in the UK, despite the extensive evidence that's been provided and a request from the Treasury Committee, the Director General of the NCA has failed for over 2 years to start an investigation. So in contrast with the US and where they started, where we've got so far in the UK is over 700 crime reports, 26 files of evidence. As I said earlier, earliest example was alleged false signature in a document from 1975. It appears that in the late 80s, and so from Prudent View 1990 onwards, banks have been allegedly systemically forging signatures, fabricating evidence, concealing evidence. Prudent View, 1 million customers, and lost to customers in the billions. And like in the US, the media picked up the story in the UK as well. And so in July 2019, the Treasury Select Committee asked the Director General of the NCA to engage directly with the campaign and investigate the allegations. And the results from that are there's still no investigation after, no investigation started after 2 years. There's been minimal direct engagement by the then Director General. She never met with the campaign, and no response to, I think, letters since September 2019. Crucially, she chose not to ask the NCA Director of Investigations to investigate, and instead passed the crime reports and evidence to another one of her reports, whose job was to build an anti-fraud community with the banks, and also personally co-sponsored an NCA initiative with the bank. Okay, so we're 2 years later. This is what's happened with the NCA, and the contrast between the US action on this and the UK inaction is really, really stark, especially when this is a history level event. So banks have been allegedly committing these crimes against customers through all stages of the litigation process. And so, but very roughly, the litigation process falls into these stages. There's before litigation, before the banks actually start the case, the bank then commences a claim against the customer. The customer then defends the claim. And then there's disclosure, which is where the two parties exchange the evidence. And then there's a civil trial, which is the main hearing before a judge. And then there's the post-litigation stage. So those are roughly the main stages in the litigation process. And so what the campaign has done is step back from all the crime reports and look at how do all the crime reports that have come in map across these various stages. And as far as we're aware, this is the first time that crime reports have been viewed and mapped across all the stages of the litigation process. So the next few slides take each one of these stages in turn and just explains a bit more about it. And in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you can see the format of the slides that are coming up. So they're basically a chevron with, for each stage, what the bank does, literally, in the middle of the chevron, and then above it, what the customer and the courts and external parties do, and below it, the examples of the types of alleged crimes by banks reported by the campaign to the NCA. Okay, so we'll start with the first one, which is pre-litigation. So pre-litigation, if you look in the middle bit, what the bank does allegedly. So some of the things that which have been highlighted, for example, is banks mislead customers by pretending or falsely representing that debt recovery letters are sent by a firm of external solicitors. So this is bank staff pretending to be an external law firm. Okay, and that this starts at this phase, the pre-litigation phase. But what we've subsequently discovered is it's not only bank staff pretending to be part of an external law firm to send out letters to customers, but they're also sending out claims forms and particulars of claim and other court documents like applications, also pretending to be part of an external law firm. So although this starts here at this phase, it actually carries on through later stages of the process. And another thing that happens here is the harassment of customers. So banks making up to 84 phone calls per week to customers. And this continues even after the customers contact the bank and even after litigation has commenced. So banks try and justify this on the basis that, oh, you know, sometimes people don't respond to or read letters from banks when they turn up, so we have to phone them. But the reality is this phone harassment goes on even after people have got in contact with the bank and even after the litigation has commenced. And it appears to be designed to intimidate customers into complying with the bank's wishes. And what comes across is that banks appear to have a reckless disregard for customers' mental health. If you are calling someone 84 times a week, you simply do not care about that individual or their mental health. So down the bottom, alleged crimes by banks reported by the campaign to the NCA for this phase include systemic fraud by false representation, because all the letters and other types of documents sent by bank employees falsely representing that they're actually from an external firm of solicitors or a debt collection agency. I mean, that all of those are included in that. and also the systemic harassment or intimidation of customers, either before litigation or again after litigation has commenced. So the next one is, so the bank then commences the claim. Now, again, if you go to the middle, what the bank does allegedly, then in the middle there, the bank commences a debt money claim against the customer by sending to the customer and the court a claim form, particulars of claim, and an initial witness statement. And this is part of the industrialization of debt recovery against customers. So there's a systemic process, business process, that the banks go through to create these documents and churn out these documents for claim forms, particulars, and witness statements. And this is a high volume, low cost, low quality bank court document production line. They're churning these things out. So all the customers who the bank are taken to court receive these. And if you go to the right there, only around 30% of them are defended by the customer actually putting in a defense. Okay. So for people who've been through this, it's overwhelming for people often when they're taken to court by a bank. And the significance is that only around 30% are defended. And what that means is 70% of the time, the bank's court documents are never really properly reviewed in any way. Okay, because people are just so overwhelmed, they just go along with it and they don't really even examine the bank court documents. So down the bottom, so alleged crimes by banks reported by the campaign at this stage include systemic forged bank signatures on banks' claim forms, particulars of claim, initial witness statements, systemic standard false statements in the witness statements and mortgage pre-action protocol checklist, and falsely signed statements of truth because the banks know that the contents are actually false. Okay. So so the customer's defended the claim. So the next claim, the next page, if the customer defends the claim, again, if you go to the middle, what the bank does allegedly, the bank sends its reply to defense to the customer and the court, and that's to the 30% roughly of people who have put a defense in. And then what's significant is that that figure of people still progressing, only around 6% continue to a civil trial. So out of the 100% of customers who started, only around 6%, very roughly, end up in a civil trial. And the significance of that is, again, that the proportion of customers whose documents actually get really examined, for example, in a trial, is down to around 5%, because 95% of people have dropped out at that point. And one of the people, the number reduces for a variety of reasons, but one of the key things is the customer tries to defend the claim, and then they're basically up against a multi-million-pound bank who've got effectively an unlimited budget for solicitors and barristers, and they're basically threatening the customer with massive life-changing legal costs. The bank's legal expertise against the customer normally has no lawyer, and threats of bankruptcy and eviction and repossession if the customer does not stop defending the bank's claim. So the alleged crimes by banks for this stage, full statements in the bank's reply to defence, and the real intimidation of witnesses, because the bank is aware that these people are likely to be witnesses in the actual civil trial. And then the next stage is disclosure. So if you go to the top there, in this stage, the customer asks the bank to send or disclose to the customer all the documents, data, and evidence. So the bank has a legal duty to send to the customer all the documents and evidence which help the customer's case and harms the bank's case. So this is standard disclosure. Both parties have to disclose to the other party stuff that helps the other party and harms their own case. Okay. And in addition to that, if the customer asks, there's the bank also needs to send the customer the subject access request response under the Data Protection Act, which is all the customer's personal information. Okay. Now the key thing here is that the banks select and send to their customer the evidence which actually helps the bank's case and not harms the bank's case. And the absolute key bit is only the bank has all the evidence about what the bank has done to the customer. Okay, it's the only party that actually has all the data about what it's done. And so effectively, the evidence which the court will use to judge the case is selected by the bank. Okay, so the key thing that comes out of this stage, and then the alleged crimes by banks reported by the campaign at the bottom, this is about systemic perverting the course of justice by concealing from the customer and the court documents including accounts created without the customer's knowledge or consent, customer contracts, customer contact records, account records, things like this are being concealed from the customers. And then also the metadata, like the date the document was created, who created it, the date it was amended, etc., which is all evidence about where documents have been forged or signatures have been forged. So all of this stuff, including the metadata, is being concealed from customers. Okay. So on to the next stage, it then goes to the civil trial, or heads to the civil trial. And if you go to the middle there, what happens next is the bank sends the bank's witness statement and supporting evidence to the customer and the court. And then it all moves forward to the civil trial, which is the main hearing before a judge with witnesses giving evidence and witness stand. And basically the customer loses almost every time. And there can be a variety of reasons for this, but a significant reason is there's often no equality in court between the bank and the customer. So the customer usually loses, but again, for a variety of reasons. Could be no legal expertise, no lawyer, because the bank's concealed evidence or fabricated evidence or made false statements to the court. And the bank usually wins because it's a multi-billion-pound bank. It's effectively got unlimited budget for solicitors and barristers. And it's the only party with all the evidence about what the bank has done. And it therefore selects the evidence which is going to be provided to the court. So the types of crimes at this stage reported by the campaign to the NCA, this is all about the fabrication of evidence. So this is evidence that's been sent by the bank's witness statement, with the bank's witness statement to the court. So systemic perverting the course of justice by fabricating evidence, including amending existing evidence or simply creating completely new false evidence. And this includes contracts and deeds and personal guarantees, forging customer signature on fabricated documents, forging the customer witness signature on fabricated documents, and fabricating customer contact records. Okay, and the sort of emerging conclusion from all this is going to take a really genuine investigation from the NCA, which includes the seizure of the bank's concealed evidence and metadata evidence. Okay, that's absolutely essential. That's why it has to be a criminal investigation, which includes the seizure of the bank's concealed evidence in order to bring this to a halt. So it then goes on to the post-trial phase. And again, if you look in the middle, what the bank does allegedly. So one thing that the banks do is that the bank's PR team uses the bank's victory in a civil case to persuade key influence that the bank committed no crime. There's no need for any criminal investigation or parliamentary inquiry into bank conduct. Okay. So this is the bank's PR department going out and lobbying MPs and parliamentary committees, media, including being threatened with litigation by banks, contacting journalists who write about this sort of stuff on bank contact, and even contacting the management above the journalists who write about all this in order to suppress and discredit all the allegations of crimes by banks against customers. So a massive effort into suppressing the allegations of what's going on. And then another thing, a bit further along in the middle there, the bank positions and integrates itself with law enforcement as part of the fraud community, partnering together to stop non-bank criminals committing payment fraud and other economic crime against banks and customers. Okay, so the key thing here is that law enforcement agencies view banks as partners with them in an anti-fraud community against economic crime. And banks sponsor, and in some cases even pay for, law enforcement agency initiatives. Okay, so if you're in a law enforcement agency and you're trying to work with the bank, or a bank is sponsoring some of your initiatives, or a bank may even be paying for some of the things that you're doing, that potentially creates a psychological, a relational, practical, and even financial hurdle for the law enforcement agency, firstly to perceive at all, and secondly to take any action against serious organised crime by banks against the public. And that may explain the apparent capture of the NCA by banks. Okay. And then the third bit there, bank execs deflecting allegations of crimes by banks, again, deflecting, denying them to whistleblowers, external parties like MPs. And then down the bottom, so the alleged crimes by banks reported by the campaign to the NCA for this stage include banks, executives and board making fraudulently false statements and representations in writing to MPs, and bank execs and boards having the oversight, management, control and knowledge of systemic crimes by banks against customers, including forgery, fraud, proceeds of crime offences. So the overall conclusions are, sorry, I think that was, sorry, there's a background. The overall conclusions are alleged systemic crime by banks. So some UK banks have allegedly engaged in industrial scale systemic serious organised crime since 1990, including forging signatures, fabricating evidence, concealing evidence in court cases against customers, which must be genuinely investigated by the NCA. So genuine committed comprehensive criminal investigation, which includes the seizure of the bank's concealed data and metadata evidence. But the NCA appears to be captured by the banks. There's been no investigation for over 2 years, minimal direct engagement by the then Director General. The Director General chose not to ask the Director of Investigations to investigate, but deflected it to another member of our staff whose job was to build an anti-fraud community with banks. The same staff member is now Interim Director General of the NCA, personally co-sponsors an NCA initiative with a bank, and the same bank gave another law enforcement agency £1.5 million. Okay, so I mean, yeah, if you're in a law enforcement agency and a bank is working with you and potentially sponsoring what you're doing or even paying you, and you know, and then some allegations come up about systemic serious organised crime by banks against the public, you know, the threat of a bank saying, well, you know, you have to bury this, or, you know, our cooperation in working with you might decline, or our sponsorship might decline, or us paying you might decline. You know, that if that is going on, and we don't know if all that's going on, but if that is going on, then that is an example of capture by the banks. So the next steps are, we really need an urgent inquiry by the Home Affairs Committee into the NCA's failure for 2 years to investigate serious organised crime against the public, including the apparent capture of the NCA. And we also need the Home Affairs Committee to carry on doing regular progress monitoring of an NCA genuine investigation. And the other thing that needs to happen is the NCA actually needs to genuinely investigate the allegations, including the seizure of all the concealed data and metadata. And so the campaign is writing to the Home Affairs Committee to request this as an urgent inquiry. So that's it.
Julian, the word that comes to my mind is wow. I can't think of anything other to say other than, wow, I mean, this is just, it really is very worrying on two levels. One, that there is good reason to think that the allegations are worth alleging, and given the amount of evidence that you've managed to gather, it's entirely rational and logical for you to have the concerns you have about whether there have been systemic and systematic forging of documents and signatures by the banks. But even more worrying than that is that, having delivered this kind of treasure chest of evidence to the authorities, something's not being done about it. I'm struggling to contain myself, and frankly, I think you've just delivered one of the best presentations we've ever had, of a crystal clear commentary with a very effective set of slides to back up exactly what you're saying. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll be happy to join me in thanking Julian for what was an outstanding presentation in my personal point of view. That really was superb. You are performing a public service here, Julian. But before we go to others for questions and comments, Julian, I think I know the answer. Are you doing this on some kind of paid basis? Is somebody paying you to do this work? How is your work being funded? What's the story around that? What sort of sacrifices are you making to do what you now do?
My wife is a part-time teaching assistant, and we live off her salary, and I don't have an income.
And it breaks my heart knowing how much money is wasted by all kinds of quangos and authorities. Wasted money down the, excuse my language, I nearly swore, money down the drain, wasted on all sorts of initiatives that amount to really nothing. And we've got a man like you doing what you do without being paid a penny by anybody for doing it. And something is seriously wrong there. And all I can personally say to you, Julian, is I am off the scale impressed with your integrity and your calmness and the rather forensic and scientific way in which you've amassed the case. And the authorities that you've been trying to engage with, who have frankly been letting you down and the public down, ought to be bloody well ashamed of themselves. I couldn't help it. They ought to be ashamed of themselves for not picking up on this and getting it sorted out. It really is rotten. The financial services sector, as I said earlier, ladies and gentlemen, it's completely dependent on being trustworthy. And to have a financial services sector that is trustworthy, you need a financial services ecosystem that's trustworthy. And that means the regulatory framework, the authorities around it. I am once again shocked by how much wrong there seems to be in our system. I better stop ranting, otherwise I'm going to get really wound up. Julian, hats off to you, sir, for doing everything that you've been doing. I've gone to gallery view, which means I can see you all. Please wave your hand at me, literally or digitally, if you know how to do it. Mr. Paul Pascoe knows how to do it. We're going to go to Paul first, and I just saw Nick Rogers and Paul Jenkins. So we'll go around a few folk, and then we're going to pass over to Anthony Stansfeld, who is an equally impressive, right-minded citizen. Mr. Paul Pascoe, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Julian, I mean, I can't agree more with what Andy's just said. It's absolutely phenomenal, the work you're doing. It's scandalous that it has to be done as a public service when some of these people will probably spend on a lunch what your wife takes home in a year. I've got a couple of questions which I suspect are questions that other people would want to ask, so I hope I'm doing a tiny service here. Linking into what Andy said at the beginning, that the purpose of the TTF is not to be a talking shop and to commiserate with victims and to applaud the people who are desperately trying to make a difference. what is it in real terms that we could or should do? What are the lessons from the US, for example? Because there, at some point, they got to a tipping point. And so are there lessons that we can learn from any analysis you've done of that, which might then focus our minds and collective efforts? And it makes me so angry. Obviously, I'm very aware of the work you've been doing and how much effort you put in it. But it just makes me so angry that I almost want to personally fund a specimen case, which I can't do on a criminal basis, but almost on a civil basis. I just feel like, let's find one of the most slam dunk of these cases, and let's just bring it as a civil claim where the burden of proof is lower. Because if that's necessary, and we need to find some capable lawyers who will do it on some sort of assisted rate, and I put in some cash, we then try and on the back of that, we get some other people to put in some cash, but we have to do something to break the deadlock. And my final question was, I can't believe that I've understood you correctly when you say that you've had 9 attempts to get some sort of reaction from the NCA, and you've just got nothing. I mean, I can't believe they just completely ignore you going, hello, I've done all of this work. I've done a lot of your work for you. You're called the National Crime Agency. The clue's in the title. If 700 and whatever it now is, files on crime that is nationwide, that must be tens of billions of pounds worth of losses. If that doesn't fit within their criteria, what is the scale of the things they're focusing on? And how can we just force them to say, forgive my French, fucking answer him?
All right, Paul, you make your point so well. Before we go to Julian for his response to what Paul's just set out there, and I think you made some really great points, Paul, could you just very briefly give us some context here? So what is it you do, Paul? What's your background?
I was a lawyer until 95. I then went into business, was involved in lots of tiny, trivial businesses. Some of them were basket cases, some of them succeeded as much by luck as by judgment. Yeah. And I was in business with Noel Edmonds, which is what then enabled me to realize in 2007, when the HBOS fraud, when the criminal trial finished in January of 2017, I realized that I was a victim of that fraud and that Noel was a victim of that fraud. And that then stimulated a much wider interest, with my jaw getting closer and closer to the ground as to the behavior that these banks do and how it is a matter of routine. And as hard as it is for people outside of this metaphorical room to believe it, it is just routine, and it's designed into the system. And I'm a huge fan of what Anthony Stansfeld does, and I find what he talks about and his suggested approaches and solutions to be so compelling. I just want to give what time I can afford and what resources I can afford to help the initiatives that I think are more likely to make the biggest difference. And I think what Julian is doing is one of those.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. That's really, really interesting context for those that don't know you. Julian, what are your thoughts, responses to what Paul set out there? And then we'll go to a few others, folks. I know there's others that want to make points. So we'll be quite concise, but Paul's raised some really interesting, powerful points.
Okay, in terms of what can people do, 2 things. One is, if you're a bank customer victim, please send your evidence to the campaign, because this is about volume of evidence. So if you've been through this process, have a look back through the slides, think about the different stages of the litigation process, look through your court documents, look at the signatures on the court documents. if you know that they've been false statements in the witness statements from the bank, if they concealed any evidence, then please identify that and send the evidence to the campaign, because this is just about accumulation of crime reports. And so the more we get in, the more that pressure it puts on the NCA to do stuff. The other thing is, and maybe TTF could do this, but the other thing is, we're going to be writing to the Home Affairs Committee MPs. It would be really, really helpful if other people would write to the Home Affairs Committee MPs and say, this is really, really serious. Please, will you do an immediate inquiry into this? This can't wait any longer. Yeah. And so if you have personal contact with MPs, or if you have an organisation and the organisation can approach the MPs on the Home Affairs Committee asking for this, then that would be really helpful. Okay. In terms of the lessons from the US, I think the main lessons from the US is this gets fixed when a government organisation decides that it's going to go and fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the individuals, I'm no one in this. I mean, the NCA simply don't care about me. I'm just some guy who's irritating them at the moment. And, and the problem is that the longer it goes on, the more evidence comes in and the more it just becomes completely overwhelming. So I'm just an irritant, but I have no position of authority in this at all. So in order to get it fixed, it actually needs a government agency to be motivated to fix it. And so it will need the NCA, because of the scale of this, it's vast. It will need the NCA to be committed to doing a really thorough investigation, which includes seizing the bank's data, metadata. Okay, so we have to find a way of motivating the NCA to do that. And the NCA is responsible to the Home Secretary, and the Home Affairs Committee reviews all that. So the thing that will help motivate the NCA is if they know that the Home Affairs Committee are really serious about holding their feet to the fire, about investigating it well. And so getting them involved is really key to do that. And then I think there was a third point about what do the NCA do? I mean, when I've been sitting and watching the various tactics that the NCA have been through with us, I mean, I think it was Theresa May's phrase, the opposition, hostility and obfuscation is off the chart, and it's just continuous. And as I've been watching them, they sort of gone through different stages of how they've been trying to avoid doing this. And I think where we've got to is that they're at the point where they're desperate to not see any evidence that this is systemic.
Yes.
Because the moment they see or accept that this is systemic, this is systemic process, then this is serious organised crime at an industrial level, and they have to go and do something about it. So they are desperate. However, whatever is put before them, they're desperate not to open their eyes and actually see that it's systemic. Okay.
There's a phrase we've been using in TTF quite a bit recently. The phrase is willful blindness. It's when the authorities deliberately don't see what you're sticking in front of their noses, and it's the thing that keeps coming up. Julian, please do carry on. I think I cut across you then. I didn't mean to.
No problem. And then so one thing where I think they got to now is the deliberate blindness, as you said, but the evidence, it just becomes overwhelming when you get senior bank senior managers saying there's a culture of signature forgery, and signature forgery was rampant. It's impossible at that point to say, oh, just an isolated case. So the evidence keeps coming in, and it's just becoming overwhelming for them. And then the second thing is, my sense of what they were going to try and do was, in order to look like they'd done something, was, pick a few cases and then pass those to a local police forces to make it look like they'd actually done something and investigated something, and then pass them to the local police forces, knowing that no local police force is going to go and take on a major bank over one customer case, and then it would all get quietly dropped. And I think that's what they were they were trying to do. Don't see anything systemic. Find a few cases to make it look like we've actually done something, and then just bury the whole thing. So I think that's where the NCA have got to, and we're just waiting to see what happens next. But the thing that will really shake it up is if the Home Affairs Committee launch an inquiry into it, and then all the correspondence we've got with the NCA, that can all go before the Home Affairs Committee, and it will all come out. It's all in there. It just needs to come out, but in the right forum, which is the Home Affairs Committee.
Julian, thank you so much. I have an idea to share. Over the last 6 years, we've sparingly used open letters to really do what we can to get our message across, and they've worked. There was one open letter we wrote to the Work and Pensions Select Committee to basically look into hidden costs and charges in pensions and investments, and that resulted in a good bit of progress. And as I think some of you may know, we've done one quite recently where we wrote to Rishi Sunak, inviting him, or suggesting rather, that we should actually, when the new chairman of the Financial Conduct Authority is appointed, we basically said that there needs to be some proper transparency of the process, and we need to make sure that whoever the new chairman of the FCA is not somebody who is conflicted or loyal to the City of London, because the FCA is consistently failing to protect consumers from harm. So we wrote the letter, and we had all these people co-sign it. I'm going to speed up the scrolling, otherwise we're going to be here for ages. And our thought is basically it makes it more difficult to ignore the letter if we got a whole load of people supporting it. And what we're doing now every Monday morning is we are sending the Chancellor an updated version of this list. And I can tell you that when we sent this one, I think we were at about 175. We're now up to about 325, Julian. So whatever letter it is that you're planning to write to the Home Affairs people, why don't we get 50, 100, 150, 200, 500 people co-signing it? And we'll also get in the papers, and that's really important. The media have got a massive part to play in this, and we managed to. And I have once again to thank Mark Bishop for this. Mark's such an ally, such a great ally. What I'm showing you now is page 38 of the Times from a couple of weeks ago, where we got a bit on the Times here. We're in the Telegraph, we're in Money Marketing, and a few other papers as well. So that combination of a really well-worded letter, a whole load of people backing it up and supporting it. I mean, I'm sure that maybe half the people on this session tonight would be happy to co-sign it, maybe even more than that. We could do a bit of campaigning to get more evidence, which is what you're after, and to get visible support from more people, which is what you're after, and frankly, make it impossible for you to be ignored. That's the problem at the moment. They have the luxury of ignoring you. Let's take that option away from them by being too noisy and too creative. Julian, it's amazing what you're doing. We're going to go to Alex Varley-Winter, and then we're going to go to Charlie Boyle. Alex Varley-Winter, please introduce yourself. And by the way, Alex, later on, please do put a link in the chat to your recent blog about all of this, because I think there may be some people who've not seen it. Alex, you still there? Yes, you are. Go for it, Alex. Thank you.
Sorry, my daughter literally just walked in. I was going to ask about this co-sponsorship. Which direction does it go in? So the NCA has a co-sponsorship with the sorry, I'm trying to get involved. They have a co-sponsorship, but what's the actual? I was trying to think, in what way is it the NCA sponsoring a bank, or is it the bank sponsoring the NCA? I didn't quite follow.
Right. There is a bank that co-sponsors an NCA initiative, which I think is called the Fusion Cell, and it's co-sponsoring it with the guy whose job it was to build the anti-fraud community with the banks, and that chap is now actually the interim director general of the NCA, because Lynn Owens has gone recently, and this new guy's come in. And the only way we discovered this was the bank actually included it in its written evidence to the Treasury Committee, and it said that it co-sponsored an NCA initiative personally with this guy. So that's all we know about it. We don't know what sponsorship means. We don't know if sponsorship means we put staff in there, we put staff in the NCA, or we jointly work with the NCA, or we pay money. I mean, it might be that they're paying money to it. We just don't know. So that would be a really good thing to find out. But the same bank does pay money to another law enforcement agency. I mean, it's I think Prem Seeker did a parliamentary question on it, and it turned out that this bank was paying another law enforcement agency £1.5 million. So if there was ever an incentive not to investigate crimes by banks against the public, then being paid £1.5 million would be a really good start.
Wow, this is amazing.
So that evidence, it's if you go to the Treasury Select Committee inquiry on economic crime, it's in it's one of the banks has put it in there. It's in their written statement to the Treasury Committee.
That's fascinating stuff. We've had a core request from Joanne Rosso asking whether you might be happy to name the bank which is sponsoring the NCA initiative. I'll give that a bit of thought, and you may want to put that in the chat, Julian. Let's go to Mr. Charlie Boyle, who, by the way, has been wonderfully helpful to the TTF in recent weeks, helping us to get our act together on social media and stuff. Charlie, please introduce yourself and then share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So yeah, Charlie Boyle, accountant, whistleblower, independent journalist. My dad ran a bank a very long time ago, so from quite a young age I got a fair idea of the way the world works. And Julian, I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying, that we, given the impression that this is being done on an industrial scale is very different to the odd newspaper article that people just sort of glance over, say, oh, it's all very depressing, and move on to the next thing. I remember, I think it was a year or 2 years ago, where the BBC, I think it was BBC One, actually covered this whole forgery story. Maybe I was one of the few people to actually see it. It was covered for 5 or 6 minutes, but it was sort of given with the angle of, well, it's just a few isolated cases and nothing to see here really. So I think that was the BBC's attempt to say, well, we did cover it. I don't remember the exact words of the piece, but as a journalist, that was my takeaway, that it was just a few ranters really, which is obviously not the case. That's the way it was presented. So it really is about strength in numbers, but unfortunately, the odds are somewhat stacked against us, and justice does tend to prevail, but sometimes it takes rather a long time.
Thank you very much, Charlie. You're reminding me of a link I sent Mark Bishop a couple of weeks ago. I found myself watching something on YouTube. You know how it is, you find yourself watching weird stuff on YouTube. There I was watching YouTube, and I was watching ants at work, and it made me think that's what we've got to be like. It is strength in numbers. What one individual ant can't do anything, but believe now, if you get a swarm of an army of red ants or whatever it is, they can really do a lot of they can do a lot. So I think we need to think like ants.
Well, the other thing to bear in mind is that most of the general public, they see these sort of types of fraud all the time, and they think that what happens to them is not really a story, but it is if you put it together. I've had things come out in the mainstream as headlines that people wouldn't even think of, but because I knew who to go to, I was able to get it out. So it really is strength in numbers.
So somehow we need to get together. We need to engineer a situation where we've got one or more people in Parliament really pushing this. One or more mainstream papers really pushing this, plus non-mainstream folk like Charlie and co. We also need to get somebody within the regulatory framework to accept that it's his or her job to sort this mess out. At the moment, everyone seems to be slopey shoulders. Can we go to, it's Mr. Rogers, I think, who was waving at me earlier. Is there a Mr. Rogers? Nick Rogers, please take yourself off mute, Nick, and introduce yourself, Nick, and make your point. I'm sure you were waving at me earlier.
I was waving in gratitude for everything you were doing, but no, I'm happy to put a few points. I've been dealing with a case for over 30 years, and as a photojournalist of 40 years, I've been absolutely amazed by what I have discovered, which is strangely very similar to that which Julian has described. And I'm so pleased that Julian has managed to put it all in such a concise and well documented way. But I mean, going back for a while, I was instrumental in starting a group called the Bank Action Group, which was one of the early pressure groups. Now, it got enormous amount of publicity, and I didn't want to be a front person, but Patricia Griffiths, or Patricia Wright as she's now known, she was an amazing front person. And of course, with my experience of the media, I was able to attract a lot of publicity through knowing how to approach the publicity. Now, I would also say that the problem when an individual takes a legitimate complaint to a newspaper, that the newspaper might be keen to tackle it, but by the time the reporter has actually done the report, the laws of libel insist basically that you have to approach the bank or the individual concerned to get their side of the story. Now, as soon as that happens, the bank then does their best to muddy the waters in every way they can, and the customer really doesn't know what has been said. But by the time the article ever, if it does get published, it's been so edited down that the impact of it, or the truth of it, has been removed. So the lawyers at the banks are complicit in completely destroying a customer's credibility without the customer knowing. So it's very difficult for a customer to get a story into the press. I would have expected by now that the amount of evidence that we have gathered would have been enough for one of the papers, I would suggest the Sunday Times, or the Dispatches program, or Panorama, one of those, to have actually got to grips with it. But the whole conspiracy, the whole cover-up that's been going on throughout every echelon of the government, down through to even the politicians, means that they just don't want to look at it. And they, as soon as they think that you are getting anywhere, they refuse to correspond with you or take up the case. So, you know, thanks to Julian, I'm 110% behind him. He's very eloquent, which is more than I am, and I would like to say, well done. That's it.
I think we all support your comments, Nick. We really do. What wonderful input from everybody here. In just a minute or two, we're going to be going to Anthony Stansfeld, former Police Crime Commissioner at Thames Valley Police. Anthony's a regular at our events, for those of you that don't know. Always really, really worth listening to, and he's got some great insights on these and related matters. Just before we go to Anthony, we have time for one more person to make a comment or share some thoughts, ask a question. Leslie Cohen, is that your hand up? Yeah.
It is, Andy. I was just going to say, I wanted to echo that, you know, broadcasters, BBC and any journalist has got an enormous task with this one. I mean, I have huge sympathy for everything that's been said. I completely support everybody who's here. I would really like to make this a story that would actually get on BBC Radio 4. But I honestly don't know whether it will get on in its full panoply, because you know, there is this major problem that I know the editors will say, how much evidence do you actually have? You know, can we run that? And the BBC lawyers will probably say there's not enough for us to take this risk, because there would be a very big risk of a libel suit. And it, you know, I think that the idea of somebody bringing a civil or a criminal case that would kind of give us a sense of what is happening more widely would be something that you could focus on. Then you could perhaps try and reach out from that to the bigger picture. But it kind of needs something, I think, to be able to let the broadcasters and journalists attack it as they really want to.
Great points, and this goes back to, I think, the idea Paul Pascoe shared at the earlier part of the Q&A about the idea of having a slam dunk type case that we really rally around, put a lot of energy and thought and focus and support into that, getting it over the line, and maybe that can be our trailblazer, our pathfinder case that enables everything else to follow in behind it. Superb stuff, Leslie. Thank you very much indeed.
May I just say, with all due respect, I believe I have such a case. If
perfect, let's talk.
I mean, because it has gone on for so long, and I have experienced every avenue of it. And I have put a chat line up to Paul, who I noticed, I think it's Paul, who I noticed actually had dealings with Noel Edmonds, as well as I have. And it's compelling. And it involves suicide, blackmail, everything. It's a very good case.
Okay, what we'll do, let's drive that forward, Nick. So let's me, you, Paul Pascoe, Julian, Mark Bishop, whose opinion I always listen to, and maybe one or two others. We'll have a Zoom conversation. We'll kick that idea around and see where we go with it. Thank you, Nick. We're going to invite Anthony Stansfeld to share his thoughts. Anthony, if you're there, I think you still are with us. Over to you, please, Anthony, and please take the opportunity to first of all introduce yourself, because there are a few new TTF members with us tonight. I was always very pleased to hear from you, Anthony. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, I was the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Thames Valley, one of the very biggest police forces in the country, something I did for nearly 9 years. And Thames Valley prosecuted the very big fraud in HBROS, which was a major banking fraud. 2 other police forces had turned it down. The SFO had turned it down. It was about 850 million, we reckon. We prosecuted on 245 the defendants, and we only got a few, what I would say a few of the middlemen probably, but they went down for 48 years between them. So we got heavy sentences. But a couple of quick points before I start. We were talking about the media. There is no shortage of journalists who would like to carry the story. The biggest problem they have is with their proprietors and editors, because Lloyd's are about the biggest advertiser in the newspapers.
Yes.
Where at your side, it should read, we're at your throat, I think, probably. And so they're very reluctant to lose it. And if you look at television, you'll find on the commercial channels, you'll endlessly see a black horse running alongside a railway engine. And this is very valuable to people. So at the top of them, they're very reluctant to take on the banks. And I can come back to that later. But the HBOS fraud, and it ties in totally with what Julian has been saying. I and Julian have been discussing this really for the last, I think, about 3 years now, Julian, isn't it? 3 or 4 years. But the HBOS fraud was entirely based really on forged documentation and forged signatures, forged everything. And what became apparent when I was the Police and Crime Commissioner is that it was the tip of an iceberg. It was going on a much wider scale than one branch of one bank in Reading. And the fact that that branch could generate a fraud approaching £1 billion was quite extraordinary. After that particular case, a very large number of people wrote into me, and it was almost impossible for me to deal with it because I had so many other things to do as PCC. But eventually, I realized that other PCCs weren't dealing with this at all. I think one of the most depressing things that I came across was how the FCA seemed to be absolutely aware of it. There was a detailed report written by a senior accountant in Lloyd's, Sally Masterton, called the Turnbull Report, which laid out quite clearly what was going on. 157 pages. It was only written in draft. It was authorised by their head of audit and risk. However, Lloyd's immediately sacked her when it went out. The FCA got a copy of the report. It did absolutely nothing about it. Nobody could deny the report was true, I don't think. Sally Masterton was sort of dismissed as a rogue employee, totally unbased on fact, and it hadn't been authorised. All of that was actually a lie. It was authorised, and it was true. And eventually I and I think it was Lord Hollick and one or two others put on so much pressure on the chairman of Lloyd's that they had to compensate her and admit actually most of it was true. But did the FCA do anything about it? Absolutely, precisely nothing. It still sits there. In fact, they concealed it more than anything else. It is quite clear, and I've looked at them, and I have seen Julian's very brilliantly put together files. And Julian was putting this together. It shouldn't have been him doing it. It should have been the National Crime Agency and the Financial Conduct Authority. He's done more than those two great organisations have together. And the sums of money are far bigger than the other sums of money they're probably dealing with. But not only is it the forged signatures, it's bank accounts being opened in people's or companies' names without them being aware of it. And those bank accounts being lent huge sums of money, which at 18% interest, which the poor person whose bank account it was had no idea that they had this. And then the debt could be run up and run up and run up. And of course, there was no money involved at all. It was totally an internal bank transaction within the bank. Parallel bank accounts being run, two bank accounts with the same sort code number and the same customer number, yet and the same dates, but totally different figures on those accounts. And one set sent to the insolvency service and one to the customer. And again, there is absolute conclusive proof that this was going on. Forged bank guarantees, forged contracts, false documentation presented to the insolvency service, and a number of other types of forged documents. And Julian is the expert on this and has the evidence. I think one of the problems with major banking fraud is that it's never committed in one particular policing area. The victim will be in one police area, the bank will be in another, the accountants will be in another, and the dodgy lawyers will be in another one. So it's very easy for a police force to shrug its shoulders and say it's not our responsibility. And this was the problem with the HBOS case. And I think it was a miracle, actually, Thames Valley took on the case at all, having been turned down, you said, 3 times already. I found that if I actually tackled any of these cases that were scattered across the country, I was immediately complained about. They're powerful people. One major accountancy company complained about me, one major legal company complained about me, and another group of solicitors complained about me. And all of this I had to then defend in front of my police and crime committee, who quite honestly were local councillors who didn't understand what was going on at all. And I was found guilty of acting ultra vires. Well, whatever you do with one of these major frauds, if you're a police and crime commissioner, inevitably it's going to be ultra vires because most of it won't be in your area, but a bit of it probably is. And I think it's because they're so widely based, the police just shrug shoulders and deny any responsibility to taking on a fraud. When the FCA eventually got round to finding Lloyd's, who had taken over HBOS for their lack of assistance, they were fined 65 million, which is peanuts for a bank. It should have had a naught in America. It probably had 2 noughts on it. It was reduced to 45 million because they cooperated with the FCA. Well, they're hand in glove with the FCA. They operate in their fraud prevention system there. They finance it partly. And they wonder the FCA didn't find anything wrong with it. But when they were fined, that 45 million didn't come back to Thames Valley that had spent £7 million on the case. It went straight back to the Treasury. And I wrote to Philip Hammond, Philip Hammond, and said, could you give us some of this money back to pay for this case? I got not 1 penny back. And the one lesson that goes out to police forces is it's simply too expensive to take on a major bank. And we had somebody after Julian was saying, it's almost impossible to take on a case because the bank has unlimited pockets. Well, if a large police force can't take on a fraud, how on earth can a private individual take on a major fraud? You simply cannot do it. And this one poor gentleman took it through about 6 or 7 stages. Every time it was moved court and moved up and appealed against. And eventually he was run into the ground through lack of money, not through lack of proof, I may add. And I think the regulatory authorities, and it's not just the Financial Conduct Authority, it's the Financial Reporting Council, have known about what's going on for years. The NCA was absolutely handed this on a plate 2¼ years ago by Julian Watts, with some very well laid out files. And that number of files has increased, I can't remember what it is now, 26 or 27 files covering 700 cases. They were asked by the Treasury Select Committee to look into it. They have not looked into it. They're still assessing it. They haven't interviewed, as far as I'm aware, a single one of the victims of those 700 cases put towards them. So they're not investigating it. They're doing absolutely precisely nothing. They're covering it up. Avon and Somerset Police, one of the major places this appears to have been done from was Lloyd's in Bristol, their Global Recoveries Group, I think they call it. There are a vast number of cases there. Some of the same people involved in doing those frauds were the same people involved in the HBOS case. I'm told it's not a criminal matter. Forging documents isn't criminal. Well, I believe it is criminal, and so does the law of the land believe it's criminal. What on earth have they done about it? They've sat on this for years in spite of irrefutable evidence being given to them. If the police don't investigate fraud and the regulatory authorities, whether government or the authorities that are meant to regulate things like the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, who on earth does regulate it? I mean, action fraud, as we all know, is a complete joke. It's been reversed now into the National Economic Crime Centre. Well, a part of the part of the National Crime Agency. I'm told, and I don't actually have the accurate figure, that it employs only 4 people full time. Well, to take this on, that is absolutely pathetic. We need a vast team of people to do it properly. And I've laid out actually elsewhere how this should be done. The police at a regional level run counter-terrorism and serious organised crime. There should be a third arm, which should be largely forensic accountants with a few police officers. It should be sponsored to the tune of probably 300 to 400 million a year by the Treasury, and it should be independent of the Treasury, and it should properly investigate fraud, because nobody else at the moment is doing it. What I find particularly worrying is that the people in charge of the organisations that should be dealing with this and have known about it seem to be the very people who keep getting promoted. I note with interest that the Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset has been promoted to be head of the Police Training College. I note that Graham Bigger, who I've sat in front of and explained this and gone through the evidence, has now been put in charge of the National Crime Agency. I find that quite extraordinary. And also, I had meetings with Andrew Bailey. And again, he had copious knowledge of what was going on. And he is now Governor of the Bank of England. It worries me. It's very easy always to say that it's the government that's behind this. Funnily enough, on the whole, I don't think it is the government. But I think that within the civil service, there is a revolving door with the regulatory authorities, the civil service, and the banks. And people go from one to the other and do not want to rock the boat and, in fact, deliberately cover things up. And I seem to see that time and time again. I don't think I shall go on really any longer, but the documents that have been forged by banks. And it's not just the banks, it's also some of our major accountancy companies are over their neck in this. Something has got to be done about it. It is the NCA's job. But in my view, under its current leadership, it is not going to do that job properly. And if it's not going to do it properly, it's got to be the police, and that has got to be financed properly. And the government decision needs to be made on who is going to take on fraud, because at the moment, nobody is taking it on. If people haven't read it, I wrote a paper last year called the High-Level Fraud Paper. I think it had 4 editions, the last edition. But if you haven't read it and you want to understand it, I've laid it out pretty clearly over about 3 or 4 pages what went on. And I think I will leave it there, but I would go back and just say, I think Julian has done an absolutely fantastic job that should have been done by the regulatory authorities, notably the National Crime Agency or the Financial Conduct Authority. And to do it with no money when we waste millions on those 2 particular organisations doing it really badly is quite extraordinary. Many thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. Once again, you've delivered a very, very powerful message. Can we please show our appreciation and our support for Anthony? Like Julian, Anthony's been doing a great deal to try to bring truth to these issues. He's been doing an absolutely awesome job. Let's go to Nicholas Wilson. In the meantime, please think about if you have any points you'd like to make, because we're going to shortly go to our just a minute round. But first of all, to Mr. Nicholas Wilson. Nicholas, some people on this session might not know you. Please do take the time to introduce yourself. You're a very modest man. You, like Julian, have been doing incredible things for other people's benefit for many, many years, and you've been carrying a very heavy burden for doing it. Like Julian, I salute you. Like Anthony, I salute you, sir. Nicholas, please introduce yourself and share your point. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Julian, for an excellent presentation. I've spent, for those that don't know, I've spent 19 years now fighting a massive multi-million-pound fraud by HSBC Bank. I'm having gradual success. It's always 1 step forward and 2 steps back, but it's going in the right direction. But I want to make a very brief point, which I've made before on here. We always talk about banks, and we mention them, and we talk about these huge organizations, but banks consist of people, and it's the people that are doing these things. And I think we should be focusing on the people. And I mean, I'll just give one very quick example of something that happened in the course of my campaign. The head of Economic Crime Unit, City of London Police, a man called David Manley, twice refused to investigate this HSBC fraud. Then shortly after that, he ended up working at HSBC. Now, I worked out his salary at the police would have been about £190,000 a year. So imagine what HSBC were paying him. And that is the problem, is they are all in the pay of the banks, and they are all promised well-paid jobs if they keep their mouths shut. I still
agree.
think we need to go after the people. That's really just my point.
And I think that's a really, really intelligent point, and you do always make it, and we ought to be very cognizant of it. We need to find a way to establish personal jeopardy for the individuals who've been in charge of what's been going on. Somehow that's what we need to do. I also completely agree, Nicholas. In a moment, we're going to go to Lisa King. She has what we call a 1 minute round, just to share her thoughts. And Lisa's somebody that really is very well worth listening to. Then we're going to go to Mark Bishop, then to Ian Fraser, and then time permitting, we'll go to a few others after that. I hope everyone's found this session enjoyable is not the right word, but it's been very, very informative, and it's been very evidence-based, and we've all been pretty calm about it. But underneath that calmness is a raging fire of annoyance and anger. Our country is too good to tolerate this rubbish that we are being asked to tolerate. That's kind of my state of mind about it. It really is. Our country is too good to tolerate this kind of rubbish. This needs to change. Would anybody like to make a point before we go to Lisa King? Paul Jenkins, are you waving your hand? I think you are. Mr. Jenkins, please take yourself off mute and introduce yourself, Paul, and tell us what you'd like to say. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. Very informative and got it in a nutshell. Julian's got that demonstration. They always said, time and tide wait for no man. Back in '84, when I found the bank stealing money from my accounts, I closed my accounts and left them with a £36,000 overdraft. They destroyed my export business. They nearly had my house off me, and I fought them. And in 1999, I sent them a statutory demand for the money they'd lost me, my business. They put in an injunction to stop me putting in a winding up petition against the NatWest. In that, they put forged documents, false accusations, false claims in their affidavit. I went to challenge the jurisdiction, the injunction, and the judge said, well, it was a busy day, he said, when he didn't have time to sort of give his full attention to other court cases, all the cases. So mine was just pushed aside. And they claimed they got £4,900 costs. I got a letter from what was called the Court Enforcement Agency, which doesn't exist. That must have been put up by the bank, and I think Julian illustrated that exactly. So they said they'd got a win, you know, costs against me. Now, I wrote back to them and said, where is the judgment on this? Where is this, that, and the other? And I said, you cannot have a judgment that's based on fraudulent evidence. Not another word from them. You've got to go for them. You've got to be brave and stand up to these buggers, because they will do everything to stop you. And you've got to realise the police would love to help. In fact, several police officers said they'd like to help me, but they've got to consider their pensions. If they rock the boat, they lose their pensions. And that happens with a whole lot, the staff in the bank. Now, I made a complaint about NatWest to Lord Boardman back in 1984. 5 pages my letter was. I got 5 lines of response. I wrote to my MP. He said, you better go to the police. I went to the police. They came back with a statement of 6 separate entities for over 6 months of money they said had returned to my account. So that's like you going into the shop, walking out with a banana or whatever, and somebody catching you and saying you've been shoplifting and prosecute you. How's that for the bank can get away with that?
Understand. Paul, thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights. You've made your points very well indeed. Lisa King, could I please invite you to introduce yourself and share with us briefly whatever thoughts come to your mind, having been part of today's session. And Lisa, it's very good of you to be with us today. And it's very good of you to bravely step forward and say what you're about to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for the invitation. I've listened today to the evidence from Julian, and I have to say that I'm utterly shocked at the depravity that has taken place over the recent years. Unfortunately, sorry, Andy, unfortunately, it cost the life of my husband. The bank destroyed him with their lies and deception. And listening to and seeing the evidence from Julian today just confirms everything that we had suspected for many, many years. From 2013, my husband was lied to. They fabricated everything. Someone tried to help us because they got a repossession order against us illegally. They forged documents. Everything Julian had said earlier was done to my late husband. And the person who tried to help us, they've tried to destroy him too. I recently received more evidence of the deceit from our regulator, our ombudsman, and the bank. It's too late for my husband. But for his memory, I'm still fighting. I'm still fighting them because they're not going to get away with the way they destroyed him. They're not going to do it to me and our family. These people are disgusting. They need to be named and shamed. For too long, they have got away with destroying innocent victims because we are all victims. It doesn't matter who you talk to, our stories are all the same. They're all horrendous. We, the victims, have done nothing wrong, and yet we pay the price for their incompetence. And it doesn't matter which victim you talk to, it's the same banks, it's the same people. The evidence that I received recently, the names are the same. And it's disgusting, and it sickens me. It honestly sickens me. What they did to us, to my husband, they broke him.
But Lisa, we've only known you for a little period of time, but every time I find myself talking to you and listening to you, what comes across is this absolutely purely authentic and completely justified frustration and anger, but also a truly remarkable sense of resilience and tenacity. You have a very, very strong character, Lisa. You would not be able to do what you have been doing over several years, and it shines through. And I hope everybody would join me in just showing our appreciation and our respect for Lisa for sharing what she has just heard. And believe you me, I've got to know Lisa's case quite well in the last couple of months, and she is absolutely justified in saying what she has just been saying. Can we please show our appreciation to Lisa for stepping forward in that way? And we can't allow ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, to fall into the trap of thinking, even for a moment, that we are talking about some abstract issue. You know, what's been going on is really affecting real people really badly. Yeah, we're working on a white paper at the moment. It's called Counting the Cost and Human Suffering Caused by the Malpractice, Malfeasance, Misconduct and Misselling by the Financial Industry. And so some of you know about this already, and some of you have stepped forward and given your testimony for this. Let's never forget that underneath all this malpractice, real people are being affected in a really bad way. And let's please all do all we can to work together to try to make a difference, because right is on our side. You know, right is on our side, and sooner or later we're going to get the break we need to get. It may be that kind of test case idea that Paul Pascoe was speaking about earlier. It might be the letter idea that Julian was speaking about earlier. We have to almost fight this battle like we're fighting guerrilla warfare. We need to do a lot in a coordinated and joined up way. And every time we doubt whether it's worth doing it, every time we think of giving up, we need to think about what Lisa's just shared with us. Because if you've got a heart, you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that. Lisa, I absolutely salute you and everybody else.
I just want to say one thing, Andy. Can I just add just one little piece?
Please do.
The evidence of the wrongdoing by the bank was put together in a report, and this report was passed to the FCA, and everything in it was true and honest of everything that the bank had done to my late husband. They dismissed it, they ignored it, they said it was, well, basically rubbish. However, when the same evidence was put together by a lawyer, they acted straight away.
Yeah.
They still haven't held their hands up. They will do, I hope, soon. But it was just ridiculous what they did. They turned a blind eye to something that they knew that my husband was a victim of, and they did their utmost to not only destroy my late husband, but also the person that put this report together. And that is wrong, absolutely wrong. It's because without legal representation, you're not going to get anywhere, and they'll just keep on dismissing you. Another thing the FCA were prepared to do, was when they turned a blind eye, they were going to allow the bank to take our home, even though the evidence showed how corrupt the bank was, what they did. They were prepared to do that to protect the bank. And it's wrong, Andy. You know it's wrong. Everyone who's watching this knows it's wrong.
It certainly is, Lisa. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, 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 very much. Let's work on the basis, folks, that if we don't sort this rubbish out, then our kids and grandkids are going to be carrying this burden into the next generation. Something has got to be done to stop this systemic rot in the system. We're going to go to Mark Bishop, then we're going to go to Ian Fraser. Mr. Mark Bishop, share your thoughts, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Andy. This is a just a minute section. I apologise in advance that I may speak for more than a minute. If anybody gets fed up, please put your hand up and tell me. I think that if you want to succeed at anything, the first step is to define what you count as success. Now, coming after Lisa and what she said, you know, I can very much understand that some people on this call may believe that success is prosecuting and locking up a bunch of bankers and probably regulators as well. And I sympathise with that position, but I think it will be difficult to achieve. Often, I think if you want to, if you set out to achieve, you know, something huge, you might actually achieve nothing. It may be better to set out to achieve something that is achievable. And I think that what might be achievable is genuine and full financial redress for the victims and the perpetrators leaving the industry for good. Personally, I think, you know, in many areas of financial services, misconduct and regulatory failure and cover-up, those are, you know, that's the compromised position that I, for one, could settle for if the alternative is to get nothing. So the question then, if you agree with this, is how can you achieve that? It seems to me, you know, listening to Julian's presentation, you know, there are some remarkable and compelling claims there. There's no evidence there, but I take it on trust because I know, you know, his reputation, and I know Stansfeld, and I know other people who've been involved, that there is the underlying evidence. So everything I'm saying here assumes that the underlying evidence exists and can be brought to bear. Then the problem that you've got, I think, is that you're making some remarkable claims. You claim to have great evidence to support those claims. But as far as normies are concerned, by normies I mean people who are not close to the issue, you know, I mean your average backbench MP who's just concerned about getting re-elected, your average journalist just as working on a deadline. As far as those people are concerned, if this story were true, then surely there would have been prosecutions. So the biggest weakness in your case is that there haven't been any prosecutions. So if I were in your position, I would be thinking about what the implications are for that. And Nicholas Wilson, who so often is writing these things, said, you've got to think about the individuals. So I would be writing to Graham Bigger, who leads the NCA. He's only come in very recently, I think maybe in the last few weeks. And I would say to him, we made the following allegations, all of them substantiated by documentary evidence on date X. I think date X was maybe 2019, so it's a good couple of years ago. So far, there have been no prosecutions. and we've been given no indication of when or even whether there will be prosecutions. We are extremely concerned about this, and we have for some time been considering courses of action such as, for example, a complaint to the IOPC, which is their regulator, or the kind of complaints body, a judicial review, should you come back with a decision not to prosecute, or even a private criminal prosecution for misconduct in public office. Because as I'm sure people here know, the offence of misconduct in public office takes place when an officer of a statutory body, without reasonable excuse, fails to perform his or her statutory duties. And if the boss of the NCA does not prosecute these people, that offence may have been committed if your evidence is so good that there is, a statutory duty to prosecute. Now, of course, he's only just come into the job, so there is no sense at all that he could be guilty of this offence yet, but there could be if time progresses. You could then say to him, with all of this in mind, and knowing that you are new to the job and keen to, put your make your impression on the organisation, we would like a without prejudice meeting with you to discuss progress in our case. And then go along to that meeting, assuming you get one, and have a conversation with him about what you want. And bearing in mind it's without prejudice, you could say to him, look, we understand what your problem is. And the problem is that there is a huge kind of critical mass of the UK state that does not want to prosecute bankers. It's the biggest economic sector. We don't really want you to prosecute bankers if we can get what we want without prosecutions. And what we want is financial redress. A way of achieving financial redress without the prosecutions would be the establishment of a Royal Commission or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, by which the victims of bank misconduct, indeed financial services sector misconduct generally, can be given financial remedies. The perpetrators can voluntarily agree to leave the scene, and there can be improvements to regulations so that these things don't happen again. For this to happen, you will need to bring in the FCA and the Treasury. The alternative is that we will bully you out of business. Put it as bluntly as that. We will be coming after you, first with an IOPC complaint, then with the judicial review, then with misconduct in public office, private prosecution. And so this is when I come into what Paul Pascoe has been saying. Paul was offering to consider contributing to or even fully privately funding a private prosecution of an individual banker. That might be a useful strategy at some point, but I think before that, I would be going after the NCA, because what you want to do at the moment is to turn the NCA into your GIMP, the party that will do what you tell them because they're afraid of you. And the strategy that I've outlined, I think, would achieve that goal. So I think what you need to do is have that without prejudice meeting with Bigger. If he refuses, of course, then you could just escalate to IOPC. Or in fact, what you do is you tell him that he's got 30 days to meet with you, or else you're going straight to the IOPC. And I'm sure he will meet with you. And at that point, you explain to him what you need him to deliver, either the prosecutions or a satisfactory alternative. It's his choice. Now, he may say, I don't have any ability to deliver the Treasury and the FCA sat around a table putting together a redress scheme. I can't do it. I'm a prosecutor of criminals. But what he might say is, but I can go after the bad guys. And then that's fine. You say to him, great. Please, can we now discuss a timeline of deliverables? How many people will you be prosecuting by what dates? And we know how many people are involved because you've got your dossier. So there's a large number. And as happened with, for example, HBOS Reading, we know you can't go after every perpetrator for every offence that was committed. So what you probably want is specimen cases that are distributed evenly across the banks, but they're good ones that have really good evidence. Now, at the point at which he starts going after those people, I suspect you will find that the Treasury and the FCA are very interested in having a conversation after all. Yeah. Now, the approach that I'm outlining here is based on very simple game theory. And it's also, and so if anybody here is interested in this, go and get a book called something like Game Theory for Dummies. Have a look at really basic game theory. And also I'd recommend a book written by kind of popular author by the name of Malcolm Gladwell, which is called David versus Goliath. And one of the great things about that book is it basically says, how can you, as the little guy, win a war against somebody really big? And that is actually by leveraging your smallness. So in this particular case here, you can't sue a bank. None of us can sue a bank. That's ridiculous. I doubt we can prosecute a bank. We might be able to prosecute privately an individual banker, but we can't go after a bank. But actually much, much easier than that is going after an individual police officer, kind of police officer, the guy that runs the NCA. So what you've got to become is his worst enemy and his best friend. If his years in office are dominated by this case, and he understands that the minute he deviates from your chosen strategy, he is personally in jeopardy, he'll do what you tell him to do. And what you'll tell him to do is prosecute these people unless there is a credible alternative solution from the FCA and the Treasury. And as long as he believes that, and as long as the FCA and the Treasury believe he will prosecute because of the hold you have over him, they will deliver that credible alternative solution, I bet you.
Mark, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Can we please show our appreciation for Mark sharing his thoughts once again in such a compelling way? Lots to think about, Mark. Let's pick up on some of these thoughts, Mark, in our strategy conversation next week. Let's please do that. Mr. Ian Fraser, over to you, sir, and then we'll bring things to a close. Ian Fraser, please do take the time to introduce yourself. Not everybody will know about you and the great work that you've been doing. And over to you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so, excuse me, I'm Ian Fraser. I am a journalist and an author. I helped to expose the HBOS Reading fraud, which took about 4 years of my life between 2009 and 2013. And that culminated with 8 people being jailed for a total of 47 years. Obviously, that was largely thanks to the efforts of Thames Valley Police, who came in and did a criminal investigation after me and others, after I and others had done a sort of journalistic investigation of the crimes. I mean, I do think Charlie Boyle is a little bit unfair about the BBC programme. They did something in 2017 on The World Tonight, done by a guy called Andrew Hoskin. And it wasn't quite as bad as he made out. I think Hoskin did a reasonably good job. I think Andy Verity, over the past four or 5 years, has consistently reported on bank signature forgery, and I did put some of the articles in the chat. So what you have to realize is that any article on this topic is extremely difficult for a journalist, because there is the danger, which is sometimes overhyped, that a bank will sue the paper or the broadcaster if they get something wrong, if they misinterpret something, or they don't have sufficient evidence, or whatever. So a lot of stories get knocked back by media lawyers, whose job is to check whether a story can be run without defamation or libel risk. And so you don't, in reading or watching the media, you're probably seeing the tip of the iceberg, as far as journalists who are trying to get stories through, which are knocked back by in-house lawyers. Well, not necessarily the tip of the iceberg, but there are significant numbers which never see the light of day because the in-house lawyers knock them back. This was a story which was run in the Scottish Mail on Sunday. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes.
This was run on the 4th of February 2018. And it was a good story. It revealed how there was essentially an academy within RBS to train people how to forge signatures. And this was done by a journalist called Lorraine Kelly, and I helped her with it. She's a very good journalist, which I didn't actually know what she's doing now. And then what happened 2 weeks later was we ran a story in the Scottish Mail on Sunday, which basically was a woman called Jean Mackay, who had been fighting RBS for 10 years because they'd forged a signature on a document, on an official document, which was actually related to PPI, making out that she had asked for this product, PPI, which she had never asked for. She didn't want it. She'd made it clear she didn't want it. And she won this battle after a 10-year fight with RBS. They admitted publicly to the Mail on Sunday that they had forged the signature, and they offered her £500 compensation and a formal apology. But to me, it was a breakthrough, because this was the first time, and it came because of this story, it was the first time that a British bank, to my knowledge, had publicly admitted that it had forged a customer's signature in order to make profit, because obviously it was charging her a premium for that PPI policy over the course of many years, and it was getting front-loaded profit on that PPI policy from the forged signature, which wasn't her signature. So that again is probably the tip of the iceberg. It's probably not a one-off. It was probably quite widespread when PPI was at its peak, that the bank was forging customer signatures in order to sell this product. So one of the questions I had for Julian, and by the way, I think his work is amazing, I think he's doing a fantastic job, is he seems to be focusing more on the bank, like rewriting history for court cases, where they will fabricate documents and they will forge signatures and conceal evidence, et cetera, in their preparation for a court case where they want to take a customer to the cleaners. But my question is, has he looked at cases where they've actually forged it earlier in the cycle, when they have actually forged it in order to pretend a loan or insurance policy or something of that nature was taken out by a customer, when in fact the customer had never signed it and never requested such a loan or insurance policy?
Thank you, Ian, for your question to Julian. Julian, if you can respond to that, then we'll start bringing matters to a close. It's been a wonderful, wonderful session. Thanks for your points, Ian. Julian, would you be able to respond to what Ian has just asked? Thank you.
Yeah, it does include some of that, because some of the 1975 one, the very earliest one we've got, the people found out about that fabricated document 8 years later. So the first time the customer saw the signed deed in the signed contract with his name on it was 8 years after the event, apparently. And so some of the fabrication appears to be when the court cases are coming up and the bank suddenly realizes it's in trouble, and then literally just goes and makes a load of stuff up in order to win the court case. And some of it appears to be that they did this a while ago. They never told the customer, and then the customer suddenly gets taken to court and they said, yeah, but you signed this document however many years ago. And that's the first time that the customer ever comes across it. So it's a combination of both bits, I think.
I just suddenly thought about one other thing, which is during the swaps review that the FCA organized in, I think, 2012. This was interest rate swaps which were missold on an industrial scale to SMEs in the UK. And RBS was obviously the biggest misseller of these products, of the interest rate swaps to SMEs. I don't know if Steve Middleton's on the call, but he knows a lot about this. But it would appear that when the review started, the bank, certain banks, possibly including RBS, started to rewrite the actual process by which the swaps were sold to the small business customers, making up phone calls and those sorts of things, and putting a new minute in the file which claimed that the customer had agreed on the phone at a certain time on a certain date, which was false, to take out an interest rate swap. So is that something that you're also focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's fabrication of evidence that's subsequently used in the court case. So in one of the slides earlier on, I think it's talked about customer bank records and bank account records and customer contact records. And it's where the banks have gone in and literally made up conversations with customers or elements of the conversation with the customer in order to prove their case in the subsequent court case. So it's all of that stuff, as well as the fabricated evidence includes that sort of example.
I better stop soon, but I just had one suggestion. Can I just say one suggestion? Is maybe the best thing to do would be to actually focus on UK retail and small business banking correspondence and try and feed in stories, particular stories from your immense amount of evidence, which are personal stories, a bit like Mrs. Jean Mackay. I don't know if that's something that you've considered doing or whether you may already have done it, but I can certainly help by giving you the full list of who are the UK personal finance and retail banking correspondents on UK newspapers and in UK broadcasters.
That would be a cracking idea, Ian. Let's make sure we do pick up on that. That's an absolutely cracking idea. So thank you very, very much, Ian. We're going to bring the session to a close. Does anybody have anything they are itching to say before I bring matters to a close? Just wave a hand at me if you do. I think Sheeda, please be very brief for me because we're already over time. Sheeda, please be very brief for me and share your point. Thank you, Sheeda.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sheeda Oraki, and just want to say the forgery is not within the bank. It is with the public servant, the insolvency service. The senior lawyer of the Treasury solicitor wrote to us in 2020 and said the document, certificate of appointment as a trustee in bankruptcy, is forgery. But they are referring it back to the person who has forged this document and saying that insolvency service has to answer you.
Thank you.
What I want to add very shortly is not only, as one of the members said, that go after the individuals. We need to go after the individual rather than going after the bank. We need to go after the solicitors and the regulator of the solicitors, because if the solicitor will not come and try to cover up the fraud, we will be home and dry.
Thank you, Sheeda. Thank you very much indeed. And for those of you that don't know, Sheeda is somebody with another virtually unbelievable but very true case. Personally, I think we've had a remarkably constructive session. We've heard from Julian with his wealth of evidence. He was able to communicate such a complex set of ideas in a remarkably clear and compelling way. That was superb, really was superb. We then had Anthony backing that all up with his experience as the former police crime commissioner at Thames Valley, the guy that got the job done and got some baddies actually locked away. Truly remarkable efforts there. And we've also had input from Mark Bishop and Ian Fraser, and we'll never forget, I don't think, the testimony from Lisa King as well. Thank you all for investing your time this evening. I'm going to restate the point I made earlier. We are not about being a talking shop. Yeah, life is too short to just talk about this stuff. We've got to somehow go through the great ideas that have been discussed tonight and create an actual action plan and then implement it. And I'll liaise with various folk about that. Let's turn tonight's session into the beginning of a powerful campaign to get the justice and the compensation and the reform that you all deserve, and I bloody well want to see as well. Thank you all very, very much indeed. We'll wrap it up there. Well done, Julian. 10 out of 10, sir. That really was remarkably good. Thank you very much indeed. Good night, folks. Good night, folks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.